Good evening, good evening. Gotta put on that big old smile for starting to stream. What's up, Tech Gadget? Charles, how both you guys doing? Thanks for hopping in and checking this thing out tonight. So I've got a decent stream scheduled for tonight. This is actually kind of going to lead into a two-parter where the overall, I guess, topic that I would like to go into is how to deploy Vue apps, specifically serverless Vue apps, into AWS. And over the course of this stream and next week's, we're going to create a basic to-do Vue app. And we're going to, today we're going to primarily deal with the front end and getting that all deployed out to AWS. So I'm going to configure and set up S3, going to set up CloudFront, and then we're also going to automate deployments using GitHub Actions. And then next week, we're going to go into how to build out kind of the back end and build out the API, build out the database, get some authentication put in here. So pretty much by the time this thing is done within the next 2 weeks, we're going to have a full-blown, full-stack to-do app hosted completely in AWS, completely serverless. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be good. James, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it. Manuel, how are you tonight? Charles, not bad. Keep forgetting YouTube mutes by default. Yeah. All right. Yeah, AWS. Yeah, so for those who don't know, before I get into it, Charles and I work together and we do Azure at work, and it's a common joke that every time something about Azure gets brought up, I try and shill AWS. Well, James, we're gonna I guess if you stick around or watch the recap, we're gonna go ahead and do that tonight. So, all right, I'm just gonna get right into it. Okay, so I've got VS Code open. So what we're gonna do, here's kind of like the flow of how things are gonna go tonight. So we're gonna create a basic Vue app. I'm not doing anything except for using Vue CLI, which is gonna give us a default just Vue app spun up, no changes, no nothing doing there. So the coding itself is gonna be pretty minimal. But then I'm going to go into AWS. We're going to deploy this app into S3 and set up a public-facing website. I'll show you how easy it is to get that set up. And then from there, we're going to deploy it out to AWS CloudFront, which is the CDN product, Content Distribution Network, built into AWS. And then finally, we're going to add a GitHub action to our repository, which is going to let us quickly be able to make changes and automate deploying out to AWS. Every time someone uses Azure, an angel loses their wings. Dude, you're making me choke up. I'm so saving that. Yes. Yeah, I love that. And now I'm like completely distracted and I'll giddy over that statement. Anyway. All right. So here we go. I got VS Code open. I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal. As you can see, I already have a folder open that I've set up for the stream ahead of time. And to create an app, we're going to do Vue. I got the Vue CLI installed already, so if you don't know how to do that, there's an article on my website you can go check out. I can post a link in the description of the video once the recording is done. But it's Vue, create, and my Vue app. Actually, I'm just going to name it my to-do app because that's what it's going to be called by the time we're done with this thing. Let's go ahead and hit enter, and this is going to take some time and kind of churn through and do some stuff. Oh yeah, I forgot. You gotta set some presets, pick some presets. This will basically set up some different features of Vue. We're just gonna go, we're gonna manually select just because I know we're gonna be doing some things with this. So the Vue version, we're gonna select 2 because that's the one I'm most familiar with. We're gonna do router, we're gonna do Vuex, CSS preprocessors because I like using Sass. We're not gonna do any testing that's a little bit beyond the scope of what I plan to demonstrate here. We're gonna pick Vue 2. History mode, we're going to go ahead and enable that. That's in the Vue router. I'll get into that probably next week when we do more about this. Node Sass is a library I prefer. ESLint with Prettier. This is all just my common settings that I usually select when I'm creating Vue apps. Dedicated, set this as featured. No, that's fine. All right, so now it's going to do its thing. Yeah, you instantly made an enemy between James and Charles. You two are, I'm sure, going to be bickering on this chat the entire time you guys are around, so it's going to be fun. All right, so while this takes its time, yeah. I'd like to add Vue modules. Yeah, let's add Vue modules to a git ignore file. We don't want all those Vue modules being pushed up to Git. This thing shouldn't take too long to finish doing what it's doing. And before I proceed, I would like to get this thing kind of up and running just to show what the app looks like. We're almost done here. Yeah, running completion hooks. There we go. All right, so I'm going to cd to my to-do app, which is the directory that Vue is going to create by default when you're creating an app. And then I'm going to do npm, let's see, npm, node modules should be already installed, so we should do npm run serve, which is going to serve up our app in the local browser, or in the local server, so we can view it in the browser. Yeah, we'll allow access there. Okay, so as you can see, once I do Vue runs or npm run serve, I got a localhost 8080 is where it runs that by default. So let's pop up a browser and do a localhost 8080. And you can see we have our Vue apps being presented inside of our browser. So this is what it's going to look like for most of the duration of tonight's stream. Let's see, no, isn't work, so I won't say anything. All good here. You did say you got an article, Vue 101. Yes, on my website, if you go to brianmorrison.me/blog, it's just an article that shows how to do pretty much exactly what I just did here. It's not thorough. It's the first of what I plan to be a series of videos, or a series of articles, probably and videos on how to do more stuff with Vue. James says, do you ever use the Vue GUI thing for running Vue apps? No, I'm not familiar with that at all. I think I've heard about it once when I was started learning Vue, but I've never used it and I'm not familiar with it. Can't say. All right, so now that that is up and running and we can see what our app looks like, let's head back here, and I'm going to kill this because we're not really going to use the local browser for development. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hop over to AWS. We can close this tab since we're not using it anymore. So AWS, as I've explained a couple times, or many times before to people who ask me about it, is not really kind of one thing. It's a collection of a lot of things. In fact, I think there are over 100 different services that AWS actually offers as part of their portfolio right now. And they all really specialize in one specific thing. So the two that we're really going to be touching on tonight are S3, which is for, well, I guess for this part, what we're really going to be touching on is S3. So we're just going to run with that. So I can access S3 by clicking on services up here. And then if I just type S3, it's going to bring us there. Let me zoom in here a little bit so it's probably a little easier to see. Charles says, okay, I ask you, pig. Yeah, that would be cool. I'd use a guinea pig to teach Vue. In fact, if you're ever interested in coming on the stream, I'm sure we can set something up. That might be kind of fun. James says, seems like it's not necessary if you're comfortable with the terminal. I think it had a lot of neat features. I'm gonna have to look into that because again, I've heard about it, but it's been a while and I haven't used it. All right, so S3. S3 is AWS's what's called blob storage, or just object-based storage. It's for storing files, unstructured data. Not things you would need to query from like a database, although there are some abstraction layer services within AWS that allow you to do that. But you know, the easiest way to think about S3 is it's just for storing files. And since Vue, when a Vue app is built, it's a static website, we can actually host our Vue apps inside of S3, which is pretty cool. So inside of S3, the top kind of root, I guess, container was what's called a bucket. So you can see I have a button here that says create bucket. And a bucket is just a collection of files that are kind of grouped together, the best way to describe it. There are a lot of interesting and neat features in S3 that you can do, like versioning. You can create different ACLs and access policies. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it, but that's beyond the scope of what we're doing today. So the first thing we need to do to host a Vue app is we're going to need to create a bucket to store our files. So I'm going to go ahead and click create bucket. I'm going to create a bucket now. One thing that you need to know about with S3 buckets is they have to be globally unique across AWS, which means that if somebody else has taken the name of the bucket you want, you're kind of SOL. There's not a whole lot you can do about it, so you just have to pick something different. The good thing about these bucket names is very rarely do you really see them from the outside world unless you're hosting files directly through it and then sharing links out. Then, I mean, it's going to show up in the URL, but realistically, it's not that big of a deal. So my GitHub username is bmorrisondev, so I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to say my to-do app at the end. And I'm just going to put 1, 2, 3 at the end of it, just to add some randomness to it. Okay, scrolling down some of the different configuration options we have here. We've got a region, which is where primarily the files are going to be stored. Although S3 by default, I believe, will replicate, and I have to verify this because it's been a while since I've looked into this, but S3 will replicate your files across regions automatically. They are stored in one region. I'm gonna nix that. I'm actually not even gonna comment on that because I have to look more into that myself because it's been a while since I've looked into the documentation on here, and I don't want to say something that's not true. But we're gonna store our files in North Virginia as USDs 1. If you have an existing bucket where you have options you want to copy from, you have options here. The only real option inside of this entire thing we're going to really be concerned with is the public access policy. We want to uncheck block all public access since these files are technically going to be accessible to the outside world. James says, watch a guinea pig stream, that'd be cool. I was going to ask about replication. Actually, you know what? I'm going to Google that right now. I'll probably clip this out when I'm finished with this, but let's see. S3 replication policy. Permissions for replication rule. Here's right from the docs. Replication enables automatic asynchronous copying. Buckets are configured, owned by the same AWS accounts. Cross-region replication. I do think it is an extra option you have to enable. But I think the reason it shows up inside of the global region, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner of AWS, if I click up here and drop this down, S3 does not require region selection because you manage your S3 buckets globally. But I think the files are initially stored in one of these regions, and then you can enable replication across regions. So if a region does go down, you don't lose access to any of your files. No, CloudFront, James, CloudFront is the CDN product. So when we push our files out to CloudFront, it'll be on a CDN, which realistically, once you get to that point, doesn't really make a big difference anyway. I guess that's not entirely true because if your files haven't been pulled into the cache, then they're not going to be accessible. But the benefits of CloudFront is it'll make things a lot faster because that's what CDNs do. Let's see. We checked this box here. It says turn off. We're basically acknowledging that we're turning off the restrictions for public access. Versioning, we're not going to be interested in. Tagging, I'm not going to get interested in. Default encryption, you can encrypt your files if you want to, but we're not really concerned with that. But everything else here can pretty much be left to default. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create Bucket. And you can see I have a bucket here, B. Morrison, My To-Do App 123. And we're going to upload our files. So if I open up this bucket, you can see there's a pretty easy drag and drop files and folders here where we can upload our files to. So let's go ahead back into VS Code where our Vue app is, and let's build our Vue app. So if I do npm run build, the Vue CLI is going to build our app and compile it all down, make it all nice and compact for us, and then we'll be able to upload that folder up to S3 and then serve it up there. Let's see. There's no. All right. Okay, so it looks like it's finished, and then I have the dist folder, and that's where all my artifacts are stored. So if I open this and reveal it in File Explorer, because that's where we're going to need to drag it from, you can see I have CSS has our CSS inside of here. IMG, any of our images are going to be stored here. JS, this is our kind of bundles that Webpack is going to throw together for us, and this is what's the optimized version of our app. And then we have index.html, which is going to be the main entry point to our application. So I've got my distribution folder or dist folder already set up. I'm going to go back into AWS, and then all we're going to do really is just drag the dist folder over to here. And you can see if I drag it into the window itself, it's going to bring up this drop target where we can just go ahead and let the files go, and it's going to upload the files. So, at least it's been for me. I'm just catching up with chat. iPad typing. That's why I got the keyboard. I can't type on the screen. Okay. So all of our files are already here. Let's scroll down here. And there was one more option we had to choose. You can see here's all the files. You can see the folders are going to be dropped into the size of the files. Let's go to additional upload options. This is where you can get some, you can change the actual options of how the files are being stored. You can select these to kind of save money by reducing some of the redundancy across availability zones within a specific region. I'm not really going to get too hard into that tonight. Hold on, I wanted to see that advanced options. There's something I'm looking for. Here we go. So this, since our files are public, now we enabled public access to the bucket, but even though we did that, that policy does not apply to all the files that are uploaded. So by default, when files are uploaded to S3, they're not going to be accessible to anybody except for people who have access to that bucket within AWS. So in order to allow the files to have access from, anonymous access from the outside world, we have to enable this public read on the objects themselves. And of course, it's also going to say, hey, just making sure you know what you're doing here. Okay, so we'll check this and scroll down here, and then everything else pretty much can be left by default. This was the big thing I was worried about, and then we can go ahead and click upload, and it's going to finish getting all those files up there. Charles asks, is the naming in AWS unique across all AWS or just across regions? All AWS, for buckets specifically. Different policies for naming are different per service, but when it comes to S3 buckets, they need to be globally unique across AWS, which means no two buckets can have exactly the same name. Okay, so my files are uploaded. Let's go ahead and click exit to go back into our list here. Now we can see we have a dist folder, and I actually realized I screwed this up. I'm going to delete this, and we're going to re-upload this. Let's see, permanently delete. So I accidentally uploaded the dist folder, but what I really wanted to do was upload the contents of that so it ends up in the root. So let's drag this over again, try again. And that didn't do what I wanted it to. Go back here. Okay, that's gone. Let's try this one more time. So I'm going to select all the files from within my dist folder, and I'm going to drag this over and drop it. Charles says, upload, clicking behind. Oh, thanks for the heads up. Okay, so reiterating this, we have all of our files here we're going to upload. We're going to scroll down under additional upload options and go to the ACL. We're going to check read on public access, so outside individuals, anonymous people can access our files. And then all the way down the bottom, here's the upload button that I was referring to. So if we click on upload here, it's going to upload our files. Okay, and then go ahead and click exit. Now our files, now this is exactly what I was looking for. So we have basically our dist folder on our local hard drive matches the bucket itself, which is going to be important when we enable public website access. Excuse me. Okay, so let's head into, now we can't access these files by default. You can share individual files out, but it's not going to work real well for a website or web app. So to turn that on, all you really have to do is head over to properties and then scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then there's this option here for static website hosting. Let's go ahead and click edit on that, and then we're going to enable it. And you can see it gives us a couple of options here. Host a static website is what we're interested in. And then for the index and error documents, we could just leave these. We're going to name them index.html and error.html. We don't have an error.html technically, but like if you were doing this in a production environment, you'd want to create error.html, or you'd want to set this to something that you know is going to be kind of like your fallback 404 document. But for the sake of this demonstration, this is totally fine. Okay, redirection rules, we're not worried about that. Go ahead and click Save Changes. Okay, scroll all the way down again. And now you can see we're presented with a friendly URL here we can use to access our web app here. So if I click on this, it's going to open a new tab. And we are now accessing our Vue app from within AWS, hosted directly in S3. So that's kind of the gist of how to upload any static. Now I went with Vue because I'm more of a Vue guy, but if you had like a React app, or if you had an Angular app, wherever your build artifacts end up inside of your local project, you drag them in here, follow this exact same process, it's gonna do this exact same thing. I do know there are subtle differences with the way that the different routing frameworks are handled within those three main JavaScript frameworks. So that might be a consideration. But this is the bulk of the work that you're gonna need to do. Okay, I didn't know they had James says I didn't know they had a button for static hosting. Yeah, they do. It's pretty easy. It's actually easier than it used to be. When I started doing this about a couple years ago, they've streamlined the front end. It looks a lot nicer. Charles says, when you enable this, are they running Nginx or Apache or something else on the back end, or do you know it could affect the rewrite rules? Hence my question. I have no idea. Yeah, I don't even know how to answer that question. I've never been asked that question or even thought about it. I just kind of let AWS do its magic. All right. So CloudFront. Let's get into that. And this, depending on how well this goes, distributing a app through CloudFront can be either really quick or it can take quite a while. So hopefully this goes by pretty quickly. So CloudFront, I'm going to access by same thing in AWS, going to services. Let me close out some of these extra tabs I have open here. Okay, so if I click on services and same thing, search for CloudFront. This is the easiest way to access any AWS service is if you go to services and just search for the name of the service instead of hunting it down through this giant, massive list of things. Just go to CloudFront. James says, no servers necessary, they're just static files. That's right, they're just static files. Okay, all right, so inside of CloudFront, you'll be dropped right into this page, and you can create a distribution. When you distribute files into CloudFront, it's called a distribution. So we can click on Create Distribution and get started. Backing up just a sec, I'm going to show off these two options here. So you have web is the primary version of distributing files. This is for hosting websites. They have, as you can see, as of right now, they have an RTMP CloudFront endpoint, which you can use to stream media, but they're deprecating that by the end of this year, so that's not even relevant. So I click Get Started under Web. Now, one of the neat things about CloudFront is it's really nicely coupled with S3. Like AWS has kind of determined, like, if you want to host something in CloudFront, they're going to make their services the easiest, most easily accessible services to distribute from. So under origin domain name, if you were hosting your own content using this, you would just type in your domain name wherever the source is. However, if I click on this, you can see I have the option to actually just select an S3 bucket. So I'm going to select the S3 bucket that we created earlier. Origin path can be left the same. Let's scroll down here. Let's redirect HTTP to HTTPS. This option I like because if someone does, if I want to increase security and someone tries to go to my website without going, or my web app without hitting the HTTPS version of it, this will redirect them automatically. Let's go down. There's one more thing I want to change here. There's a lot of options here that I'm not going to cover individually. But that's something if there's interest in it, maybe we can explore this later. The default root object is really important. We need to name this index.html. This is how CloudFront knows when you hit it, where it should be accessing the first file. And then from there on, pretty much everything else can remain exactly as is. So I'm going to click on Create Distribution. And you can see this is the distribution for for CloudFront, for my app. So it gives us a domain name by default. We're not going to be able to access this because under status, it still says in progress, which basically means it's taking my content and sending it out to all the different CloudFront edges around the world. If I go to CloudFront map, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but basically this is a map of CloudFront. So the data centers across the world where CloudFront is actually storing your files is kind of all listed right here. If I read through this, it says there are 225 points of presence, 215 edge locations, and 12 regional mid-tier caches. I'm not 100% sure exactly what that means, but basically it's a lot of points where people can access your files. And that's kind of what a CDN is. A CDN, whether it's CloudFront or Cloudflare or any of the other different options out there, the main point of that is to take your files, take your application, your web apps, or it could be media files, it could be images too, and it kind of sends them to all these different edge locations around the world. And then just taking a look at this map, say somebody in Europe wants to access my web app and they go to whatever my domain name is for my web app. Instead of it going across the world to the US where I am, AWS is smart enough to say, hey, I know this guy or gal from the UK is trying to access the file. Let's serve up the app from the nearest geographical location, which in turn decreases latency from the app loading and makes everything run a lot faster. Okay, so let's go back in here and let's refresh this, and it's still in progress. And yeah, let's see how this goes. We're kind of playing the waiting game right now. I actually attempted to do this stream last week, And this was on the exact day that AWS had a major outage, which I hadn't quite gotten to, like to read into it. I understand. So I understand the source of the outage was Kinesis, and Kinesis is their big data ingestion service. So like if you have if you have a ton of data coming in at one point, you would set up what's called a Kinesis stream, and as data hits that, you can offload. You can process the data in real time by offloading it to like Lambda functions or into DynamoDB to store data. And I guess they tried to update the code for that, and it caused everything to flake out. But when I say everything, I don't mean like just Kinesis flaked out. I mean like half of the services, at least that I was working with, like they all went down. So this CloudFront thing, like I tried doing this last week, and it was sitting on the in progress. You can see it just finished. It's in deploy. It sat here for like 6 or 7 hours before it actually did anything, and I didn't even come back and check it. I just kind of deleted it. And I'm like, whatever, we'll figure it out later. Yeah, that was terrible timing. I mean, I was like really, I was kind of bummed out. I probably could have come up with something on the fly to do, but I'm kind of past working under pressure. Like I used to do it a lot, and I still do it from time to time, but I'm like, I've had, you know, with 2020 being what it is, I've had so much stress this year that I'm just like, if it's not going to work, then I'm like, you know, whatever. Yeah, they Charles says, hope they did a postmortem. Yeah, they did. And I just got your joke and why you said that. They did. And apparently it was a really good one, but it highlighted a lot of key infrastructure issues and the way that their systems are architected that, you know, who knows if they're going to fix. But people have put out articles and videos and stuff, and I just haven't had a chance to research it yet. Okay, so back in CloudFront, you can see our status of our distribution is deployed, which means we're done. So now if I go to this domain name and I paste this into my browser instead of the S3 one, we get the same thing. Now it doesn't look any different, and you can't really notice any big performance improvements because this app is so small. But if you were to access this from the other side of the world, this would be retrieved from an edge location that's geographically as close to the user as possible, which is what makes it operate a lot faster. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And that's really all there is to distributing something in the CloudFront. Okay, so now we're going to tie it all together and automate a lot of this process using GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions are GitHub's kind of CI/CD automation pipeline tools, and yeah, we're gonna set up an action to deploy out to CloudFront. I'm gonna create one, and we're gonna step through it and explain what everything does. So I have a tab already open where I can create a new repository. Let's name this 2020-12, and AWS. Let's see, AWS. What do we want to name this? View AWS GitHub Actions. It's probably a close description of what this content's about. We'll leave this public, no big deal there. So let's go ahead. We can leave everything else as default and go ahead and click Create Repository. Charles says, Brian, myself, and one other colleague at work had a meeting. Oh yeah, that's the joke. I probably should have said something, but I didn't. Okay, so I've got my remote Git URL here. So I'm going to copy this, and we're going to head back into VS Code, and then we're going to add this as the origin remote for Git. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to do a Git checkout main. Did not Git branch main. Git checkout B main. There we go. Yeah, the common thing to do these days is instead of using master use main on GitHub. So I just like to switch it right away. I have not updated the Git on this machine yet. So I'm going to git remote add origin. So we're going to add the origin remote, and we're going to paste in our GitHub URL here. Click enter. So that's been added. And let's commit our files. Actually, I want to git commit. I'm going to realize I'm going to need to tweak some things out here. I'm going to open this up here, and I'm just going to move all the files into the root of the directory, simply because this is where I'd rather be working from, is in the root. We might change this again, but as far as the demonstration goes tonight, this is going to be the best place to be at. Close this, try that again, and let's right click and open this with code again. Okay, git status. I want to make sure my git, not a repository. All right, so we would need to initialize this repository yet. So git init, git checkout the master, git remote add origin. Let's add our origin back in. and I have my git ignore file where we're ignoring all the distant node modules. I can tell that because in the upper left-hand corner, these two are grayed out. Okay, so let's git commit initial commit. This is my commit message, and git add dot. And now let's do that. Okay, and then git push set upstream, and we're gonna say origin main. Oh, hold on a second. Git checkout b main. Okay, run main. Git push set upstream. Origin main. I did want main. Yes, I didn't realize that. Sign in. Let's sign in. Okay, I should be signed in already. Yeah, so it succeeded. Okay, so now it pushed all my files. Alrighty, we are up and running in GitHub. So I'm going to refresh this guy here. And you can see here's all the files we have here. So now, before we can actually create our action, I did forget one step. We're going to need to create what's called an IAM account. So IAM in AWS stands for Identity and Access Management. Let me zoom in here a little bit more. I didn't realize it zoomed out on me. So let's go to IAM. Let's go there. And so IAM, Identity and Access Management. So this is where you'd want to create users and set up permissions and whatnot. So let's go to users. And we're going to basically need to create an account. I'm going to delete this GitHub deploy because this is from what I was working on earlier. We're going to create the account GitHub deploy. Okay, so under users, if I click add user, and let's create this user of GitHub deploy. And give me 1 second. I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, Parenthood. You guys, before I continue here, fun fact, I don't even think you saw this, James, when we were doing class yesterday. So for those of you who don't know, I'm also a teaching assistant for a coding boot camp, which has been pretty fun. I've been enjoying the process so far. But see you later, James. Have a good night. So, but yesterday, my infant came up to the stairs and kind of looked like he was behind a gate, but the gate was kind of starting to move a little bit. So like I was in the middle of talking to my little group of classmates, and I literally like just jumped out of my chair and booked it around my desk. I took my headphones and threw them on the floor because I was just trying to get to him as fast as he could so he didn't, fall down the stairs. So hey Charles, just while you're still here, while I got you, could you hear the crying in the background by chance? Was it noticeable, I guess? Oh, either way, no big deal. It is what it is at this point. Okay, so let's see here. Alrighty, so GitHub deploy. So we're creating an account here that we're going to be able to use to allow GitHub to access AWS and put all of our content up there. Ross is very friendly. All right, cool. Thanks a lot, man. So if I go to program, okay, so we're here, we're creating it. The one thing we want to be worried about is programmatic access. Whenever you're creating user accounts on AWS, you have two ways of letting them access AWS, either programmatically, which means they can't actually log into the service, but they can call it through their APIs and perform different functionality, or the console access, which actually lets them log in. And you have the option to enable and disable either one of these you want. So we're going to click programmatic access, and we're going to click next to go to permissions. Now, a best practice at this point would be to create a custom policy for this user to only allow them to access the services and functionality they need. However, to do that, there's quite a bit of stuff that needs to be done and walked through, and it's kind of, again, it's out of the scope of what we're doing tonight. So I'm just going to give administrator access to this user, which is going to basically allow them to access anything within AWS. And the important things I want them to access is the ability to write and delete files from S3 and modify the CloudFront distribution, because we're going to have to invalidate our files, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So we'll click next, go to tags. We're going to next through all this stuff until we get to the last screen, which is this guy here. Now, these are where you would access your credentials. For the access key ID, you would need both the access key ID and the secret access key. We're going to have to note these things down. But I'm going to leave this screen here, because if you navigate away from the screen, you're not going to be able to access this page at all, or the secret access key anymore. It's going to be gone forever. You would need to delete it and create a new one, which isn't the biggest deal in the world, but I just kind of wanted to point that out. Okay, so now that this is done, let's head back into GitHub, and we're going to zoom in here. I'm going to click on Actions, which is where we're going to create our GitHub action. And you can see there's a number of different things they kind of select for you, or different, it's a word I'm looking for, defaults or predefined actions, workflows that you can put into play. But what we want to do is we want to set up a workflow ourselves. So let's click on that guy, and you can see it's going to create a file called main.yaml, and it's got all this file in here. I have one that I built already, which contains all the configuration I need. So I'm going to copy this over instead of typing it all, and I will walk through what everything does here, because that's, I think, is going to be easier. So starting from the top, we have the name of the action, which is going to be displayed inside of our actions. We have different triggers here. So you can see we actually have 3 triggers. We have on push. So anytime changes are made to our main branch, it's going to auto deploy. Anytime a pull request is done into our main branch, it's going to auto deploy. Or this workflow dispatch here allows you to run it manually from within the actions console. So then inside of here, we have jobs. It says here a workflow is made up of 1 or more jobs. We have build, which is the one we're really interested in, and this is where we're going to kind of keep everything in here. We could create another job that would be like upload artifacts to some place and deploy it out, but for the sake of keeping everything concise, we're just going to put everything into this one build job here. So we're going to run this on an image of Ubuntu, so we're going to be running on a Linux machine where it's going to deploy out. And then underneath the steps is where you would kind of list out step by step everything you want to do in your deployment pipeline, or your build deploy pipeline. So we're going to here, the uses here is let's see, checks out. Uses is for checking out the code. This is pretty default on every single GitHub action setup. And then this is where some of the stuff that I've had to manually put in here. So this action here sets up Node.js. This action here is just a multi-line script, and this will run 2 commands. This will run npm install. Since we've published our code with none of the dependencies, meaning the node modules, and we're going to need to install those on the container that this thing is running on. So we got to do the install, and then we got to do a build to create that dist folder. And then I have a couple of custom actions that have been action steps that have been pulled in from the marketplace. On the right hand side here, you can see there is a marketplace for a lot of different actions that you can just port into your code, and different things that people found. So what I did to find the ones that work for me is I just searched for S3, and you can see these are all S3. Well, they're all actions named with S3 in there that allow you to do certain things within S3. So I more or less just kind of found like the ones that, like, I think the S3 sync is the one that I use for that. And since this has 419 stars, it's like, that's pretty reliable. Let's go with that one. So this is going to execute a sync between our dist folder and S3. As you can see under here, I've got a couple of args here. The ACL is public read, and what this is going to do, if you were watching earlier when or if you were watching where we uploaded our files to S3 initially and we had to select that public read ACL, that's exactly what that does in line. And then I also specified the delete command, which will tell this action to delete anything that's in that bucket that we don't want there anymore. So basically, it's gonna wipe out the bucket and then re-upload all of our files to it, so we get a fresh copy of our application. And these are some of the different, configuration pieces we'll need in here too. We have to specify the name of the S3 bucket, the access key ID, and the secret access key, which is what we just created. We'll need to specify the region, and then our source directory, which is that dist folder where our build artifacts are once they're built. And then if you see inside of here, secrets.aws_s3_bucket, these are build variables that we can actually configure within the settings portion of our GitHub repository. And that's where we're going to take like the access key and the secret access key that we just created. We're going to put those into our repository, and then that's going to allow Actions to be able to pull that information and access our AWS account without actually storing the credentials within our repository, because that's a bad practice. Okay, so then the last piece that I have here is this guy here, this invalidate CloudFront. So when you have files cached up in CloudFront, or any CDN for that matter, they're kind of just there, and they stay there until their allotted cache time runs out, which, if I recall, in AWS it defaults to 8 hours. So when a file is uploaded, excuse me, when a file is uploaded to S3, or when a file is pushed into CloudFront from S3 or from any source, it's going to stay there for 8 hours, and CloudFront's going to hold on to it for 8 hours. And that's really kind of what increases the performance. However, when we deploy out a new version of our application, we want to tell CloudFront to, forget everything it knows and use a fresh copy of our files. And that's what invalidating the cache means. So I'm using this action to do exactly that. So I have distribution. We're going to use the distribution ID, which I'm going to show you where that is in a sec. The paths for the files, you can invalidate folders, files, but you can also, like the /* will just basically wipe the entire cache out. And since our app is really small, that's kind of what we need. You can get into some more advanced techniques where you can get into the cache, find out what files, compare the files, figure out what's changed. But again, for this demonstration, we're just going to wipe everything out. We got our region, and then same thing, the access key ID and the secret access key, which are our credentials that allow GitHub to access our AWS account. Okay, so now that that's all kind of said and done, let's click on Start Commit, and you can see it already kind of pre-fills a bunch of information in this. Now, since this is a new file inside of our repository, we're doing the same thing as if we were to like add a file and then add a commit and then push that up to GitHub. It's just doing it all kind of in one step. So I'm going to commit the new file, and you can see our file's been created. Now, one of the interesting things before I even get into populating out the secrets in here, you'll notice is if I go to Actions, we have our create main.yaml, which is the name of the commit. We also have deploy to AWS, which is the name of our action. And you can see this yellow circle is spinning is running. And the reason it's running without us actually doing anything is because we actually committed and made a change to the main branch, which is why GitHub sees that change and is like, okay, now I'm going to run, because that's what I have defined as one of my triggers. But it's not going to work. It's going to fail once it gets to the S3 portion, just because it doesn't have the ability to access those credentials that we had set up. So to give GitHub the information it needs to allow it to do what it needs to do, we need to head over to settings and then go down into secrets, and we're going to create a new repository secret. Now to start off, I'm going to head back into IAM, and we're going to create the secret access key, or the access key ID. So we'll AWS, actually, you know what I'm going to do instead of doing that? Let's paste the value in here, and I'm just going to do this on stream because it's not a big deal. Okay, I'm going to grab the access key ID. It's easier just to paste the names in there so I don't fat finger anything. We're going to add that guy, create another one. We need 4 secrets all together. There's the access key ID, secret access key, the bucket name, and the distribution. So we'll put secret access key in there, and then I'm going to head over to the IAM console and copy this key here. And add secret. Create another one. We're going to name this one AWS S3 bucket, and this is just the name of our bucket. So now that we're done in this page, if I navigate back into S3, you can see on the left hand side here we have recently visited, so I'm going to take that shortcut and click on S3 there. And I'm going to click on, I'm actually just going to highlight this text here because this is exactly what we need. Let's paste that into our secret here. And the last piece we need is the distribution. And create another repository secret, add distribution there. And now let's head back into CloudFront. And this distribution ID here is what we're interested in. So let's copy that guy and paste it into our secret here and add secret. Okay, so you could see I'm back into Actions. Our build step failed. We expected it to, like I said. But if I click on the action here and I click Run Workflow, I'm going to run it. And this is basically manually allowing us to manually trigger this action. And here it goes. Okay, so manually run by me. Let's open this guy. And what's really cool about this, and really a lot of CI/CD tools, is you can actually monitor in real time, step by step, what everything is doing. So while this is doing its thing, I'm going to step away and grab a cup of or grab a drink of coffee. Now I'm playing the waiting game just to make sure this thing actually does what it's supposed to. And an interesting thing that I hadn't realized until I was working on this for the first time is the actual actions themselves are built inside of the pipeline, which is pretty interesting. So here's the checkout of our code. If I drop this guy down, it takes a little while sometimes for the log to output to make it in the screen, but this is taking the code basically from a repository and pulling it into a container where it can do everything it needs to do. Multi-line script is where we're doing the install and build on our repository. You can see it's pushing everything down, so it thinks something's there, but it's not. Let's refresh this page. See if we can get some better output. There we go. Okay, so that's done. Got our S3 sync is going right now. You can see we uploaded a bunch of files, deleted a bunch of files. We invalidated CloudFront. See, here's the actual command that would be run if you were doing this manually. You can use AWS has a CLI tool you can use to do all of this, and that's probably what a lot of these are they're just wrappers around that tool. And it looks like we have a green check, which means our action completed successfully. So now to demonstrate the action in action, let's head back into our code and let's change something. So I'm going to go into app.main. No, let's head into views and go to home. You can see we have this hello world component that's being imported, and that's where that welcome to your Vue.js app is actually pushed in. No, we don't need that. So you can see if I'm here, I welcome your Vue.js app, that's where that comes from. So I'm just going to change that. We'll say hello. Let's say hello. Hello, YouTube fam. Why not, right? Save that. Okay, so now that we've changed the file, let's go ahead and commit that. Let's say updated home.view. Control Enter will push it up, and you can also see one thing I forgot to mention is if you can see very in the lower left-hand corner here where you have the one down and one up, because we committed that main.yaml file into our repository, and that is a commit, we are going to need to push it down. Now I'm just going to click this button. It's going to sync. It's going to do a pull to pull all of our changes down, and then a push to push everything up. So we'll click on that to sync up our code. And let's head back in here. And we're actually going to, that's my main account. We'll go here. You can see here's my commit message here, updated home.view. If I head to actions, you can see it doesn't show that because what it does is it'll do a merge. Our VS Code will do a merge automatically between the branches, which is why this is the message that's being displayed here. But we'll just click on this and kind of wait for this thing to finish. Charles, you should be happy to know that I finally found an AWS service that I don't like and much prefer Azure over, and that is their code deployment tools. I was very much not a fan of working with those while I was trying to put this thing together, which was actually, so I was originally planning on doing this using all native AWS stuff, and I had such a hard time wrapping my head around the different code tools that AWS offers that I'm like, you know what, we'll just go with GitHub because it's a much better experience in my opinion. I still think Azure DevOps is probably my favorite of the different CI/CD tools that I've worked with so far, but GitHub is a pretty good option as well. First time, yeah. Charles says this is the first time for everything. Yeah, well. Okay, so there we go. It says our job's completed. I don't see this guy being updated. That might just be because, yeah, okay. That was just because that was just a delay there. So, okay, our build is done. Now, if I come back into CloudFront, we're using our CloudFront URL here, and I refresh this, you can see hello YouTube fam. So every time that since we set up this thing, every time we come in and we make changes to code, it will automatically push out those changes into S3 and then clear out the CloudFront cache, which is going to in turn update the cache. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have for tonight. Next week again, like I said at the beginning of the stream, this is kind of like a part one of a two-part series stream series that I'm working on. It's going to be split up into a couple of different videos, when they're more polished. But next week, we're going to take this and turn it into a real to-do app. So we're going to do some live coding. I'm going to turn my View app. We're going to add an ability to add to-dos, to check them off, to delete them, stuff like that. We're going to create a whole API in the back end using API Gateway and Lambda, and DynamoDB is what we're going to use to store our data for our tasks. And then time permitting, we might actually get into adding uploading of files directly into our app, which is in turn going to store them in another S3 bucket that we can access. And then regardless of if we have time for that, we are also going to talk about how to add AWS Cognito into this flow, which is going to give our application authentication, user management, and do it in a way that's pretty easy. Charles says, damn nice job, man. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm glad to help. I love doing this stuff, like helping people out. So just do me a favor. If you are still around, give me a subscribe on my YouTube, do the whole like, share, all that normal stuff that every YouTuber asks for. I think that's all I got. So if you are one last thing, if you're not in it, fullstack.chat is my Discord server. We have a bunch of developers in there, some who are pretty fresh, some who've been around for a while, and we just kind of all chat about dev, life, whatever. I mean, we're not really hardcore developers, but all of us are pretty much developers. So with that, I am checking out, and everybody have a great evening. I'll see you guys